I feel as if we kind of need to put it in some context, because even though it was a couple of Sundays ago, we were just reading in John about the women who walked before even the sun came up to the tomb of Jesus, discovered that the stone had been rolled away, and found out the good news. Jesus is risen. Last Sunday, it was still that very same day. Dr. Gosh shared with you one of my favorite readings, the Doubting Thomas. But that night in that upper room, that was only about 12 hours since the ladies discovered the tomb to be empty. This was still that same day, that Sunday. And in today's reading, still that same day. We're still in that first Easter with the reading from Luke chapter 24 with a story that's maybe familiar with some of you, and that is, it's normally called the Walk to Emmaus. Disciples, not just the 11 who were remaining, the ones we know about, but the disciples, the students, those who had followed Jesus from the very beginning, who also gave up much to follow him. They were in Jerusalem that day. They saw the cross. They witnessed the crucifixion. They heard the rumors that the tomb was empty. And here they were, now returning home. Some weren't that far. Some were just as close as the town of Emmaus. And that's where we land at the beginning of our reading today, on that road out of Jerusalem back to their homes. We have a couple of disciples of Jesus walking alone after a very long weekend. Luke chapter 24, I'll start reading at verse 13. And I invite you, if you have a Bible with you or have a Bible near, to read along with me. I'll end reading at verse 35. Now on that same day, two of the disciples were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were walking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some of our women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So we went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us? That same hour, they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. Amen. I was gone Thursday and Friday because I was at a clergy retreat at our Methodist camp, Glen Lake Camp, and it's in Glen Rose, Texas. And when you go on a retreat, there are no TVs, of course. And I unfortunately, well, I don't know if it's unfortunate or not, but I missed all of the NFL draft. Now, I don't know if you spent any of your time the last 3 or 4 days watching the NFL draft, anxiously awaiting to see which each of the 32 teams would choose first. But you know what's interesting about the NFL draft? I mean, and I have to have a shout out for the Cowboys. I think it's going to be pretty exciting when you draft a guy named Taco. But that's what they did. Other teams drafted who they need, because that's the exciting part of the draft. Each of the 32 teams, after the NFL draft, after selecting the greatest athletes in college football that they hope will be those missing pieces that will finally get them where they want to go. Because remember, at the end of the NFL season, only 2 teams are in the Super Bowl, and only one of them wins it. The rest of those 30 teams are sitting on the outside, looking in, thinking, next year, we just have to have a good draft, and we will have what we need to put the whole thing together. Well, those upper offices, they're not the only people thinking of this. The fan bases of all these 32 teams, including the Cleveland Browns, are thinking this is the year. We'll put them all together. We've got the people we need finally. They'll be great players for us. They will put us over the edge. They will get us to where we want to go. And they're all celebrating, thinking that this is the year. And I've been through enough NFL football seasons, as you have, to know that sometime around December, the reality will set in. And the question will be asked by the team ownership and by the fan bases, what now? What happened? This was going to be the year. And another year lost. Because not all of them make the playoffs. Not all of them get to the Super Bowl. And they have to realize that the hope they had at the beginning is now gone. This really is about hope. I know that Dr. Goss Sunday, he talked about what the resurrection was. It is the hope that we can find through Jesus Christ. But what I'm talking about is not hope. It's the sense of hopelessness. Now, worrying about your NFL team and whether they're going to be in the playoffs is certainly what I would consider a first world problem. Because there are situations around our world, and not too far from here actually, that are real hopelessness. I've often said that I live in a bubble. I live in a church bubble because everybody I know are either church leaders or go to a church. You are my church bubble, and every once in a while I have the opportunity to come out of that bubble. One of those situations was in Eastland. In Eastland, and they had a great hospital in Eastland, and it served the whole county. But they didn't have a chaplain service. They didn't have the money for that. And so the clergy of Eastland and the surrounding area would take turns volunteering to be that chaplain for the hospital. And we'd all have our weeks, and we'd be, this is your week. And, if anybody needed anything, they could call the pastor on call. Well, I really rarely ever got any calls. I think very few times we did. But one time I did get a call. It was a Saturday afternoon. And they didn't ask me if I would go to the hospital. The call I got was asking me if I would meet a family at their aunt's house because they wanted to deliver some bad news to her. You see, this woman was in her late 70s. She was living alone in this house in Eastland with her older son, who was in his 50s. He had a medical emergency, was taken to the hospital where he passed away. And the nephews and the cousins all were notified, and they came, and they wanted a pastor to go with them to the woman's house to tell her that her son had died. I agreed, of course, and I met them at the house, and we went in together. And she was sitting in what I would call if you visioned a grandmother's home. You know, it was warm. She had her chair. She was in it. She had the TV tray next to that with the remotes on it. The TV guide, the TV was on. And we went in there, and she asked, well, how was her son? They all looked at me. And I had to tell her her son had passed away. This is a woman who later revealed to me that she hadn't been in church since she was a kid, which means probably 70 years had gone by. She had no church family. She was what we would call in the church world an unchurched person. And after I had to deliver that bad news, I looked into her eyes and I saw a hopelessness that I've never seen before. Because her hope, her son, her hope for the future was now gone. It's a hopelessness that made me realize that, you know, what is evangelism? What is our job as a church? We often think, unfortunately, that it's about getting more people in here on Sunday morning. And then if we can ever evolve from that, we tend to think, well, it's about offering Jesus to the world. And that's true. But I come to find out in our world today, looking around, hearing the news, meeting women like this person in Eastland, our main job is to offer the world hope. Because hope is hard to come by. Because I don't know how you're doing on your hope energy. Sometimes it's pretty fragile. And that's where we find our friends on the road to Emmaus. They thought they finally found him. All of them did. The 12, the others, they thought Jesus was the answer. You know, the one they've waited for 500 years. They said themselves, we had hope that this Jesus of Nazareth was the Redeemer of Israel. The one God promised to David would come and be the king, their Savior, forever. And it didn't turn out too well. They thought they finally had him. They thought they were all in. These are disciples. They're not named Peter or John and all those, but they too had left everything to follow Jesus because they were sure that their hope was hooked to the right horse. Jesus was the Savior. And then Friday came. He was arrested. He was beaten. He was crucified with a bunch of thieves. He died before their eyes. Hope for them vanished like that. What do you mean? And as those two men walked home to Emmaus, they said they were discussing about the events. I guarantee you they were saying, what are we supposed to do now? Our whole life is gone. Jesus was the one. We were set. We were sure. And now we don't know where he is. What now? This is real hopelessness. When Jesus, in his disguise, asked them, what are you guys talking about? I love the fact that they were walking and it said they stopped and looked sad. I know that look because I saw it in a house in Eastland. That face of hopelessness. That's what we're really talking about. How is your hope today? Because if you're like every other human being, you probably found out that placing your hope in stuff may not be such a good idea. You know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, if I just have a home and it's safe and it's dry and warm on a morning like this, I have hope. If I just have an automobile, it doesn't have to be fancy. I just have to get to work. I just have to go around and run my errands. I mean, if I have all that, I can have hope in the future. Their family's waking up this morning in Canton. Found out that hope is pretty fragile. That all that stuff that they thought was going to be theirs forever is gone. And they're standing looking at a pile of rubble along with their neighbors asking the same question that we hear on the road to Emmaus. What now? What do I do? Or maybe we're guilty of putting our trust in individuals and human beings, where we think, as long as I have that person, we're going to be okay. We had some friends in Houston who taught with both of us, actually. Judy taught at Springwoods Middle School. I taught at Springwoods High School. He taught at my school. She taught at her school. She was English. He was math. And they bought their forever home in Belleville, Texas, which was what? How far? 60-some miles from where they taught. They drove back and forth every day because they knew where they wanted to be when they retired. They finally got to retire. They retired in their 50s, thinking, we're going to have all this time. 3 to 4 years after he retired, Hal was killed in a plane crash. Suzanne had to ask the question, what now? What do I do now? My hope is gone. You see, when we put our hope in other things, we'll always have the opportunity to say, what now? That's the good news. The resurrection of Jesus is our hope. It gives us hope. I'm not an art critic, but a pastor had spoken about a painting he had seen in one of his sermons. He's from Houston. He actually was an associate at Second Baptist Church in Houston, a very large church. And in one of his sermons that showed up in a book later, he talked about a painting that was a picture of a burned out shack in the mountains. All that was left was the chimney. And in the chimney was there in the painting. In front of it was just black embers, boards, wood, debris, still smoking. And in front of them, in front of that house, was a grandfather-looking figure dressed only in his underwear and holding the hand of a little boy who you could see was crying, and he was clinging to a patched, worn-out pair of overalls. And you could see the boy was crying. You could see he had been crying. And below the painting were 5 words. And it was supposed to be what the older gentleman was telling to the boy. And he said, "Hush, child. God ain't dead." That's the message of the road to Emmaus. We have these 2 disciples asking the question to each other, I'm sure, what are we supposed to do now? I thought we had it all. I thought we had our hope secure. And all of a sudden it's gone. Jesus shows up and let me walk with you. He walks with them and he unveils to them where the promise of Jesus is in every book of the Bible. And when they get to the house, Jesus basically then looks at them and says, "Now, hush, child. God ain't dead." He goes into the house. He sits down. He blesses the bread. He breaks it. They say, "That's Jesus." And they say to themselves, "Hush, child. God ain't dead." They hurry to Jerusalem and they tell the disciples, who tell them that he showed up to Simon. And they all say, "God ain't dead." The promise of the resurrection isn't just for life in death. It's about life right now. It's about the promise that we need to remember in our challenges, in our struggles, in our moments where we can lose our hope and say to ourselves, "Hush, child. There's no time for crying. There's no time for sniveling. God ain't dead." That empty tomb is why we can say that. God didn't disappear on Easter Sunday. He showed up, and he's been here ever since. And the good news, the real good news, is that we know God ain't dead because of that line that I love from this section. It says it on the front of your bulletin. It says, Jesus himself came near and went with them. That's the good news. Because of the resurrection, we don't have to wait to see Jesus. We can have Jesus walk with me and you right now. Hey, Jesus, I don't know if I can handle this. I don't know if I can handle this no hope thing. I've been disappointed. I've been hurt. I'm facing incredible challenges. I don't know if I can make it through it. And the good news is Jesus will come near and walk with you. Jesus will come near and stay with you. You see, we can't be a religion with just the cross, because then we have no promise. We have no hope. The hope comes from the resurrection, because God ain't dead. Jesus is alive, and when we need him, he's there, and he comes near, and he walks with you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to grab a big clump of his hand and say, all right, amen, let's go. Because that's a hope you can believe in forever. The world cannot snuff that hope out. It's the loss of someone special can't snuff that hope out. The loss of possessions, of your home, of your stuff, of your life's earnings cannot snuff that out. Because they couldn't snuff it out 2,000 years ago, and nobody can snuff it out today. We've got things to worry about, absolutely. The list can be long. Just watch 30 minutes of any news program. I can get you a whole page. We need to be worried about all this stuff. Hush, child. God ain't dead. Amen. I'd like to invite us now to a time of prayer.